Hello, guys. Welcome to this new episode of Mind Podcast. This is Adit Kapadia, and I'm joining you on yet another week of, discussions, news, and everything. And I have a very special guest with me, joining me from, and I would want to say Bangalore or Mumbai, but for our to keep up the mystery, we'll say an undisclosed location in India. is R. Jagannathan, the editorial director of the Swarajya magazine. He was previously the editorial head at firstpost.com, has at Forbes India, has worked Financial Express, Business Today, and, has been a journalist for more than, I'm not going to disclose the number of age, but let's say with a lot of experience. But decades and decades, and always fantastic to discuss current affairs issues with. So welcome to Mind Podcast, Jaggi. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Adit. It's a pleasure for me to be with you also.
Absolutely. So first of all, so when we did this with you, I think a couple of years ago or something, we got such good feedback and questions asking when are you going to get Jaggi again. So my apologies to all our listeners that you had to wait 2 years to listen to Jaggi. But let me tell you, they are, and this is, I'm not saying this because we are talking this or something. They are very voracious readers of your columns and stuff, and do write to us. Like when we have informal discussion, they're used as reference points for many things, especially your take on strategic affairs, economic affairs, and politics. So
thanks.
So to get into sort of the crux of the discussion, we're going to talk about a little bit about the India-China situation. We're going to talk about the economic situation in India in a post-COVID world. And finally, we are going to talk about some current affairs issues and end with the US elections and Jaggi's take on what he's seeing from India. So all very light topics, as you can see, Jaggi. Should be over in 15 minutes.
We have covered the whole world almost.
Covered the whole.
If you add up India, China, and US, that's more than nearly 2/3 of the world.
Maybe if we do part 2 of the podcast, we'll have to start with Fiji and Panama, the way we are going.
Right.
So let's get into it about the India-China face-off, right? So you had a sort of the prequel to what we are seeing happen a couple of months ago, or maybe 1.5 months ago, where there were numerous reports initially that China actually crossed over and stuff near Galwan, and then it was refuted by various journalists, army, and so forth. And then in the end, there was a sort of a fist fight with barbed wire on a hill where there were some Indian casualties and more than 40, I think, Chinese casualties, if I'm not mistaken. But basically that happened. And then now we are having reports where on 29th and 30th of August, the Indian forces moved into some territory. So that is sort of the crux. So what is your take on this? And do you think India and China are headed for a confrontation? Because we see a lot of 1962 memories on very op-ed pages. So I want you to know, I want your take on that. What is going on with that?
Yeah, just briefly on what really happened in mid-June. I think by mid-June, what the Chinese had done was, in an area where both India and China used to patrol, the Chinese built military fortifications into that. They didn't move into areas controlled by us, but in the areas where both of us used to patrol, they basically extended their military presence very strongly up to the areas where both of us used to, which means they prevented us from patrolling the joint areas or areas that were not demarcated. So effectively, while it is fair to say that they didn't actually come into our territory, but they did occupy a lot of space that was contested by both sides. That is the problem. And what happened and they refused to move back despite, they used talks in order to build up further military installations and support systems.
Right.
What happened in the 29th and 30th of August was that it was India's military counter. In order to see that this Chinese ingress is countered militarily and for the long term, what they did was they sort of took up the heights along the Pangong Tso Lake on the southern banks, so that it prevented the Chinese from actually dominating the military landscape. So that's why the Chinese are actually losing it. They're shouting and screaming like mad. But we have done a tactical move in order to have a bargaining chip. And if there is a chance that talks will work anything, it is this military bargaining chip that will make a difference.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
go on. No, go on. I'll let you finish.
Only one thing. I think like every other Indian administration over the last 7 decades, even Modi tried to invest in a good relationship with China in order to prevent these kind of things. But the Chinese again took us for a ride. And it is now a deep realization in the Modi government that this business of trying to trust the Chinese is a wrong move. They only respect strength, and that's where we have to build up.
And to quote from what Mr. Shourie had written in his China book when he was singing another tune, that is before 2014, he said, deception is an art of a Chinese foreign policy, right? That Chinese foreign policy may, to say one thing, do something else, has sort of been well accepted since 1962. So no reason why we shouldn't do the same thing to counter it.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, after May this year, we have been doing that. Even though we have been talking, we have actually been moving the pieces on the chessboard militarily as well. We have started moving pieces against the Chinese on the trade front. So this time they know that we are actually talking real politics, real power game, and we are not just talking, assuming that the Chinese will move back. So there are counters being planned.
The most fascinating thing I find is the thing about what Global Times has been doing. That's actually quite interesting, because they have been worried sick almost about what is going on in China.
Yeah.
So, but because normally Global Times is the spokesperson, unofficial spokesperson of the Chinese government. What I have seen sort of happening is there is some sort of a panic because of the perceived closeness of India to US. Now, I have been in the United States for almost 13 years. I've seen 4 elections. This is my 4th election that I'm going to be seeing from the ground. I have never seen India or Indian American issues being talked about as much on a daily basis that I have this time. And China also happens to be, I've never seen the White House the president answering questions about India, China in a press conference in an election year. I mean, it happens, but not with the same. So the American angle is also sort of playing into this Chinese sort of thing. So that is the most fascinating part.
See, there are 3 or 4 factors that have forced or made China that belligerent right now. One is, of course, the Indo-US political handshakes that are actually intensifying. The second thing is, of course, the fact that India has started aggressively building border infrastructure, so that China can no longer continue to threaten us indefinitely on the border with their superior infrastructure on the side of Tibet. Basically, we should talk about Tibet. We should not talk about China, because China captured Tibet, and they are actually, I don't think we have a border with China. We have a border with Tibet. Okay, and they are doing that. And all our rivers start on the Tibetan plateau. So Tibet is more important to India than China. But China has captured Tibet, and they are worried that our infrastructure is now steadily becoming more and more good. The third factor, of course, is internal. I don't think that Xi Jinping is as powerful as it's made out to be in the Western media. I think he's facing a lot of internal challenges, and his enemies inside are waiting for him to trip. And if that happens, then they will have an issue. That is the first thing. The last thing, of course, is COVID, which is actually the whole world is now battling this thing. So Xi Jinping's Communist Party is thinking that this is the right time to move aggressively on all their fronts. They have done this in Hong Kong. They are threatening Taiwan. They are even have a dispute with tiny Nepal, and they have started this against us. So I think they want to tackle all of this. They want to show that they are such macho guys that nobody can take them on. So they are started opening several fronts, which is stupidity actually, but that's what they have done. It just shows that internally they are not as strong as we thought they were.
Yeah, and they have, China, it inherently has a lot of contradictions. I'm going to do a very, very shameless plug for a piece we just published by Haritha Pusarla 24 hours ago, where it said that India has to open up Tibet, has to start talks on Tibet, and India must start bringing up Tibet. I mean, for heaven's sake, we have the Dalai Lama living in India, right? And I mean, so what can be a big, and if we talk about some icon or something that the global media, the world understands, the Dalai Lama is one of them. So that is there. But you are right about the COVID thing, because this time I'm seeing a lot of disgust in the US sort of amongst the American citizens with respect to China as well. and I don't mean with respect to Chinese people, but certainly with the Chinese Communist Party. And communism, as you know, is detested in America. Like there are my joke about it is, when you show the communist red flags, there are bigger red flags that go up everywhere across America. When you talk. So they view China with a very sort of suspicious lens already, the government. So, and this has sort of increased the case because there has been absolutely no transparency at all when it came to COVID. So you're right. But moving forward to, to sort of talk about the strategic affairs to conclude this part of the discussion, what do you think moving forward, what would be India's strategy with respect to China?
See, India's strategy will have to be the internal economic and military strengths, and there is no other way out of it. It's a long-term, medium-term process. It's not a short-term thing. The fact is, we have ignored these points for a very long time. The second part of the strategy is a strategy of economic denial to China, even at some cost to us. The Modi government, as you know, banned several scores of apps of Chinese, which make a lot of money here. Slowly, there will be a movement of trade away from China. Currently, we give the Chinese $50 billion in trade surplus every year. This is like financing our own destruction. Okay, so this nonsense has to stop. Huh?
Right.
And like America, we have made the same mistake. Being democracies, we have allowed talk of free trade to overwhelm us. America gave China a free pass. It is only in the Trump years that America has actually started questioning, have we got anything in return from helping these guys against the Russians, from the Nixon-Kissinger moves to Mao and today. It's only now they realize that these guys have quietly built their strength at the cost of the rest of the world. And India has also realized it. So that is where the point of convergence is between the US and India. But I think ours is a medium to long-term thing. First thing is we have to start denying China such a large trade surplus. We have to build the military, and we have to, and our military is capable of, it's not the 1962 military. It is capable of giving them a bloody nose. That is, they know it, and which is why they are actually moving a lot more troops to confront our thing. And by the way, we have played the Tibet card. On August 29th, the guys who actually helped India conquer the heights were Tibetans living in India.
Right. The ITBP folks, right?
Yes. No, they are the Special Frontier Force, which has never been used.
Special Frontier, yeah. So, but that you're right. But then there is also the ITBP angle, the Indian Tibetan Patrol.
Correct.
So it's very, very interesting. This. So yeah, I think it is abundantly clear that the last 6 months the strategy has completely changed. Now we have to see what happens. And one good thing is it has moved from the contours of Twitter. So now no longer Twitter conspiracy theories, because that's literally how the media discussion started, with one analyst going hammer and tong. But I think in conclusion, what you said is very important, that India has to, India is capable of giving a bloody nose, and it has to be a three-pronged strategy: the economic, political, and diplomatic. And Rajnath Singh meeting the Chinese defense minister is a good step. And then I think there are talks that Mr. Jaishankar might meet his counterpart as well in China. So let's see, what happens to that. So thanks for those terrific points, Jaggi. Now moving the clock a little bit towards home, and your first love or your first writing is economics, right? As what you've done in Financial Express and so many things. So I have to ask you this, and I'm not going to just say a random question like, will the Indian economy recover? Because economic cycles, as we all know, they do tend to rebound after a certain point of time. Ultimately, are we on the path to recovery, or do we need to do some steps in the next few months to get onto the path for recovery?
So let me put it this way: barring one or two major missteps, like probably demonetization, that was made a mistake in the short run, but largely in terms of reforms, this government has been going in the right direction. Unfortunately, the global climate is very, very negative as far as India's growth is concerned. See, unlike 1991, or even say in 2001 after the dot-com crash, the global economy is not supportive of whatever reforms we do in India, for the simple reason that the global climate is far more protectionist, far more inward looking in almost every country. And that's the thing. So the second thing is, I think because of the fact that we now have a fairly strong central government, there is far more resistance at the state level because a lot of regional politicians are feeling threatened by the rise of this new power, right? So our fundamental problems are something that have to do with the fact that we have over 70 years created an economy that disables business, not enables business.
Right.
That change has not happened. It is happening at the central level. We have improved our ease of business rankings, but ease of doing business is not a Delhi central government affair alone. It has to be done at the state level, at the city level, at the local body level.
Right.
I mean, a few days back, there was an entrepreneur who tried to set up a shop in Maharashtra, and he found that he had to get something like 11 no objection certificates. I mean, this whole nonsense that if I want to set up a company, somebody has a right to object to me setting up a company and creating jobs is a purely Indian phenomenon. That everybody has a right to stop you from doing what is right. We have a disabling kind of economy where everybody.
No, go on. I'm going to repeat that line after you're done making your point.
No, so
point.
Yeah, so we have a disabling economy because we are given lots of small mini authoritarians the right to object to somebody who is doing the right thing. If you want to clear the garbage in front of your own house, you'll have to go and get a no objection certificate from the local municipal authorities. I mean, this is the kind of stupidity we have. So what we have created is a parallel economy of people who become enablers only when you bribe them. So the NOC economy is simply unsustainable. We have to get rid of these NOCs. Basically, you have to tell me what is your locus standi in saying I can't do what is right. It is you, the onus has to be on the regulator to say why he at all needs to intervene, rather than me saying that I need everybody to say I am okay before I can do anything worthwhile. So this is ridiculous.
Yeah, because it's funny that we have gone from the NAC economy to the NOC economy.
Yeah.
During Sonia Gandhi, you had the NAC, which was hindering progress.
That's right.
Now the central government is trying to create the hurdles, but the bureaucrats are asking for NOC. And I'm not saying in our head we think that bureaucrats are, the top 5 bureaucrats in some cases. And I'm not saying that in every case top 5 are above blame or to be blamed, but this is a whole structure that needs reforms. That what Jaggi said, if you want to open a business and everything is in order, what the hell has someone else the right to say that you need an NOC? I mean, it's so strange. And if you compare this to most developing economies, I think the ease of doing business there is significantly more than what it is in India. So even if reforms take place from the top, economic reforms, this has to change. But in a post-COVID world, what has changed is if I use the word for a Hindi term like that, economy ki paribhasha, like the industries that define the economy, the Indian economy, we might be changing because the way the world is working is sort of changing post-COVID, right? There are certain, especially like when you think about tourism or those industries like that, those are taking a severe beating. And so in some places like India, which is heavily which are dependent on transportation, aviation, railways and stuff like that, will the government have to do anything to stimulate those sectors, or will they have to wait it out for almost 2 quarters to get it back in the green, so to speak?
Yeah, see, in the short term, there is no option for the government to step in with help, but the long term, that's not a sustainable solution.
Right.
India has been particularly badly affected by the COVID lockdowns, largely because even though the central severity lockdown ended sometime at the end of April and started opening up, states started imposing even worse lockdowns. Yeah. So if you actually see, the lockdowns have been worst in the 3 biggest industrial and largest portions of the economy, like first in Maharashtra, then Tamil Nadu, and then also in Gujarat to some extent. Tamil Nadu and Gujarat have started reducing, but Maharashtra is still getting worse. So Maharashtra is the core of the Indian economy right now. Luckily, I think Karnataka, where I spent a lot of the last few months, has been less stupid about this. They have actually opened up from May 1st itself, So they have been less impacted by it. So the 4th pivot, that is Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra and Karnataka, the 4th pivot actually started working earlier. Gujarat and Tamil Nadu are only now beginning to reopen up, but Maharashtra is still not opened up. So till these 4 key economies open up, you are going to get that impact of the slowdown. So we are going to lose yet another quarter. I will see probably very low negative growth or just zero growth from the third quarter. From the fourth quarter is when we will see a first probably 0 to +2 kind of growth in this year. So that's where we're going to see growth. But our real problem is actually at the state level and at the municipal level, where we do not have the kind of leadership that can really open up the economy. And there's one more thing. The lockdowns have been particularly severe on services sector. Services, as you know, are high touch sectors where we have genuine fear of people being in close contact with one another, where we use a lot of people to deal with the thing. And that sector is worst affected and is the slowest to recover. Manufacturing and other things are recovering faster.
So interesting points. Yeah, because when you talk, so I am familiar with what is going on in Ahmedabad. And so what happened in a lot of places was, and Mumbai, that there were lockdowns, but that, quick testing, I don't think India had the capacity to test that much during the lockdown. And in some cases, we weren't testing as much as we should have, right? So now that has changed in the last 2 months. But had that happened first, we would have probably been able to isolate better. And that didn't happen. And that's the thing. But I think Ahmedabad and Chennai, I mean, I'm just saying 2 cities, they seem to be opening up a lot faster than Mumbai is right now. And when and the curve, the cases aren't going up as much as well compared to other cities. Like if you look at Delhi and Mumbai, it seems like there is almost a second wave or beginnings of a second wave. But that seems to not have been the case so far in parts of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu.
Yeah. We should not rule out the possibility of a second wave in any part of the country. But I think it took us a lot of time to ramp up testing. Today, we are doing about 1 million tests a day. And we probably, that's a good level to be. And if we can move it up to about 1.5 to 2 million in the next couple of months, that would be even better. Because it will allow the health administration to act faster on narrowing down the areas of spread. See, contact tracing and things which has been emphasized a lot is impossible in India for the simple reason that you're a country of 1.4 billion people, right? So, and we are typically a touchy-feely kind of people who go and hug everybody in sight and that kind of stuff. And if you see crowded areas, I mean, I was there at the airport the other day, and I mean, nobody keeps that 1 meter distance also, So we have this, what is called the elbow push rule, where, whenever there's a gap between the guy in front and the guy behind, there's a unconscious tendency to move forward and closer to the person in front, and the guy at the back will anyway push you if you don't do that. So I think there is the problem of physical space being far less in the Indian context than, say, in America or anywhere else.
But I can tell you something, being in America, I don't think it's any different over here as well. There are places where social distancing is happening, but I don't see it much happening. The masks, thankfully, are still here around because there is a city law and stuff, because Houston was probably as badly affected as most of the cities. It almost had become one of the worst affected cities. So it was a scary 2 months for us as well over here. But, thankfully, we're all doing fine. So I think that is the challenge, that even when this is happening, we cannot lose. Your fingers almost have to be in multiple pies, that if you are looking at the COVID, you have to also look at the economy. One cannot be at the cost of others, because you can't put 1 million Indians out of work to, say that we need to test more. There is some common sense that has to be followed now.
Correct.
Right. So
yeah, I think that's happening now. I think at least at the central government level, they're asking all states to open up as much as possible and keep the containment zones to as narrow areas as possible, including just one house or one floor in a building and that kind of things. I think by 1st of October, certainly we think 90% of economic activity will return. It's only in some specific service sectors that might be slow. That may be airlines or or your barber shop for that matter.
So movie theaters, airlines, the luxury ones, dinners are those I can think of. So that is where I'm wondering to see where we are going to see some pivot points or not. Because in America, that's what they're facing, because the airlines have to open, because there are going to be a few flyers anywhere, but the holiday flyers haven't started. But this weekend is a very crucial weekend for America, which is the Labor Day weekend, the last long weekend of the year. So let's see how that pans out.
Yes, so, absolutely.
Indeed. So moving forward to the political part of it, right? And here we come to जो ये सब्जी पक गई, अब धनिया और तड़के की बारी है, right? So we'll talk about the politics of India and US and just your take on it. So in US, as someone in India, when you're looking at the US election and you have a Biden-Harris versus Trump-Pence ticket, what is your take on it? Like, what do you think in terms of India? What is India looking at when it looks at the elections?
See, in general, actually, India has had an easier time diplomatically when the Republicans have in power, largely because they tend to be transactional and not so much, not too vociferous about esoteric issues, something like, they'll make a big issue of human rights because one particular state had a lockdown, or one particular state has had a change in status because of Article 370 and all that. We expect that the Republicans tend to say, okay, that's your problem mostly, though they may make noises, but they don't make life difficult for us. So generally, even though the Republicans at a more fundamental level are inimical to India in a sense because they encompass the entire Bible thumping groups,
the far right missionary
born again. Yeah, the missionary groups, so who tend to be very anti-India in their fundamental because they see India as a new market for their religion. But at the same time, at the Republican administration level, this is not so apparent. In the case of Democrats, they are the other way around. But the left and the right in America actually combine together when it comes to India and don't leave us to fix our own problems. They want to have a say in everything they say. So I would say, purely from an Indian opponent, Trump would probably be a better option for us, even though he may not be a unifier in America. But let's see, we will deal with any of them that comes.
Yeah.
I think
no, but
there's one more take if you want. Huh?
Please, yes, go on. No, what were you saying?
So I think the problem is people talk about polarization in India, but I don't see the kind of polarization in India as I see it in the US. I mean, the way the liberals have let down America is not the thing. To have a cancel culture and suddenly think that you have to bring down the statue of Columbus and that everything will be fine if you bring down 10 statues, it's the most ridiculous kind of liberalism I think. You have to learn to live with history. Indians are being told that you have to live with Mughal history, and now you guys can't live with your own 200-year-old history. I mean, what is this wrong? I mean, that's stupidity. You're at war with yourself over culture, which is not required actually.
No, so there are two things. So you and I, this time when I was in India 6 months ago, we met in Delhi, right? And Delhi had just sworn in another Arvind Kejriwal government a week after, a week before I think we met. It was February or something when the Aam Aadmi Party won the elections. 6 months before, Modi came to power with a thumping majority with a 7-0 verdict in Delhi. So in India, you are seeing people actually giving a two-sided verdict in many places. And given the margins in Western Uttar Pradesh, how close it was, I wouldn't be surprised if some MLAs voted for, people who voted for SP vote for BJP in local elections, or people who vote for BJP vote in SP in local elections. Split verdicts are the norm. So if that really isn't an indication of the polarization that I'm seeing here, where I can tell you there were a few people 2 years ago on Republican ticket who were not necessarily hated by the Democrats in Houston. But there was, in 2 years ago, you had an option of voting straight party Republican or straight party Democrat. So you just press one button and every single Democrat on the ticket gets the vote. So from your councillor to your congressman to your mayor, everyone. So a couple of guys actually lost because people were too lazy to press individual buttons. So it's or in some cases people were just very angry. So if they were angry against Trump, to uska gussa sab is pe nikal diya. So that is real polarization, where I find that if you're mad at the Republican in center, you are going to vote for Democrat, doesn't matter how bad it is. So that is so. But we were. I was doing another podcast this morning with Jay Murug, a cephalogist friend of mine in India, and he was looking at the America numbers. And I'll tell you this: when I was simulating a few scenarios of electoral votes, right now I'm looking Biden at 218, Trump at 219, and about 110 undecided. So it is a minefield of what might happen, and the next 2 months will get uglier, I guess, as we get to the debates portion and stuff like that.
Right.
But one last thing I want
The
to
real
ask.
scary stuff is what I hear.
Hmm.
The real scary thing I hear about the US is that if neither side gets a very clear mandate and you have all these issues about postal ballots and the local governor having to declare the results and all that, if it becomes so polarized and partisan, what if you get an indeterminate verdict?
Hmm.
And you actually can't declare the result at the end of November 3rd and it goes into several courts all over the country. Then you have a real problem.
Yeah, and then you have even a bigger problem where electoral college, if you win the state, that does not, until and unless all the electors vote for you, you haven't won the state. So electoral
Yeah.
college can actually flip their vote from the Democrat to the Republican and things like that. And then there
Yeah.
are a few
Yeah.
states which split electorates, where one district can vote one way and
Yes.
one which is like India actually, the Lok Sabha
That's
seats
right.
what we have. So it's
Correct.
and there have been American fictional political shows. The American political satire writings in the last 2-3 years has been up to the point, right? Even if they have to bash Trump, they do it in a very funny sort of way, which has simulated or hypothesized tide verdict. If there is a tide verdict, I tell you, Jaggi, we are probably going to do a 10-hour podcast or something, because it's probably going to be like a live news of what's happening, and everybody will have to be running around with their iPhones in their hands doing live videos.
Yeah, correct.
But in closure, I'll tell you one thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Even if a Biden presidency came to power, I don't think India has something to be afraid of. As in, we do have enough friends in the Democratic Party to make it. But what India and Indian Americans have to do is make sure the Democrats don't take the support for granted. You have to earn it, right?
Absolutely, Adit. That is the main thing, because for us, neither party is particular. They have to defend American interests, whatever they see it as. Our thing is, we have to work with either party. We have no problem with the Democrats if that's what they have to, they come to power. Our real worry is that if neither of them come to power and if America is at war itself, then that's a real loss for India. Because when you are confronting a China, a Hitler on our borders, then you need an America to be clear-headed about where its interests lie. You cannot have the America at complete war with itself. And that's our biggest worry. It's not Trump or Biden.
You have given my a very great one word, Hitler, for the discussion. So since we have come a full circle on that, I want to so we have this tradition on Mind Podcast that हमने बहुत serious बात कर ली, so we'll end with something light. So you have to give a non-political, non-recommendation of something you've read, watched, something that you've enjoyed during. So any recommendation that you have for our listeners?
Well,
for all our listeners, I didn't want Jaggi about this, so please give him a second to think about it. I actually just throw it on him.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's in continuity with your own, the previous talk. Actually, it is not political, but I think there is a very interesting history of the 11 American nations that actually constitute today's America. Basically, it's written by a guy called Colin Woodard, and a journalist and an author. And he basically says that just like India has so many regionalities, America actually is dominated by 11 subcultures that based on European cultures that landed in various parts of geographies. So I thought that was a very interesting understanding. So regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, that those 11 nations that constitute the current United States is actually by much better understanding of America. So it's not political in that sense, but I thought Americans should read that book because I think it makes such an important statement about themselves.
Fantastic recommendation. I have a two-part recommendation. One is a very interesting Indian show I watched on classical music on Amazon Prime. It's called Bandish Bandits. And Shankar Ehsaan Loy have given some of the most fantastic compositions you can see.
Right. Yeah, correct.
And I have to tell everyone that one show thankfully has revived interest in classical music in the pop culture on another scale. So let this be a thing.
Yeah.
And then in terms of books, I read a very interesting book right now. Actually, I reread sort of that book on strategic affairs. I was reading Nitin Gokhale's Keeping the Modi Doctrine. and what
Yeah.
the defense policy have changed. Because for all our viewers who haven't seen, when the first Chinese issue happened, we had Nitin Gokhale as a guest on our podcast, and we talked about that. So
Yeah.
so go back and listen to that podcast and read this book. He's done some phenomenal work on.
Actually, Foreign Secretary Jaishankar has written the book. I think that promises to be a very good one. I'm just acquired it.
Oh yeah,
I think it's one of the most
Is it already
intellectually.
out yet? Or
Yes, it's out. It's out. You can buy it on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I just bought it, started reading it. I think he is one of the most erudite foreign ministers India has ever had, who understands both where the rubber hits the road and on the intellectual plane. I think it's very, very unusual, but Modi's got the right foreign minister for a change.
You know something, Jaggi, and I only have one witness, so you can choose to completely disregard my theory. On the day of counting, I was texting a good friend of mine, and we were talking, and they were like, who will be the ministers? Because it was abundantly clear that Sushma will not be a part of the government next time because she hadn't fought elections.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just have a feeling that Modi might just have as Jaishankar as the foreign minister. I just said that, okay? And then 10 days later, he was actually sworn in. And he's like, do you have a secret hotline that I don't know about? I'm like, no, that was a wish that I had. He's a very erudite man and a very, so,
Absolutely.
But thank you so much, Jaggi. You've been very gracious with your time. I hope this was fun, and I hope to do another one with you very soon.
2 years later.
Not wait 2 years for another one.
Okay. Thanks, Adit.
Thank you
It
so
was a
much.
pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.